Members, the House is resumed. We are on the second reading of the Biosecurity Law Reform Bill. Kelvin Davis was speaking before the dinner break and has 7 minutes 45 remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to recap the corridor before the break, Mr. Speaker, it's no secret how important biosecurity is to our protecting our primary production, Mr. Speaker, and therefore we need to invest in it. I was just getting on for the member over there from Otaki to the ballast story, and I was talking about our ancestral river Taumarere up there in the Bay of Islands, which some 60 or 70 years ago, my uncles told me they could walk 4 or 5 miles from the village right up to where the fishing grounds were along the mud flats, and they could do that in bare feet, as kids in those days were wont to do. However, that now would be impossible to achieve because of the mud flats are inundated with Pacific oysters, and the Pacific oyster industry up in the Bay of Islands has actually benefited from ballast, but however it's had the dumping of ballast rocks and water, but unfortunately it's had an effect on the environment. And these days your feet would absolutely be cut to ribbons if you try to walk those 4 or 5 miles that my uncles did some 60 or so years ago. And even gumboots I don't think would last the journey, because what used to happen was the ships would come up. The Taumarere River was quite a busy port many years ago. In fact, it was one of the main trading routes from Sydney over to the Bay of Islands, over to New Zealand. But when ships started coming up the river, of course, the depth of the water got a bit more shallow, and they had to dump their ballast and their ballast rocks. And you can see the ballast rocks on the side of the river, Mr. Speaker. And of course, they had oyster spat, which has since grown and spread and overtaken those the mud flats. So it's good to see that this bill will amend the Maritime Transport Act of 1994 to implement the International Convention on Ballast Water, so that we don't have that sort of situation happening again. And I know that ballast water has been dumped in various ports around the country, and that has led to various sea creatures and that settling. And I know also, although I can't remember the report that I read, that said that in some ports there's been takeovers by anemones and those types of marine creatures, and basically biosecurity has given up on actually trying to eradicate them from the ports because they've just got out of control. This bill also amends the scope of the Wild Animal Control Act of 1977 so that possums and wallabies may be managed solely under the Biosecurity Act of 1993. And just as fate would have it, yesterday I had a constituent in my office in Kaikohe who is a possum trapper, and he is at his wit's end on trying to deal with a lot of red tape and bureaucracy around the culling of possums. He's a possum trapper, he poisons possums, and all he wants to do is get out in the bush and kill possums. That's all he wants. It's taken him, he has to deal with the Department of Conservation, he has to deal with the Ministry of Health, he has to deal with other organisations just to go and kill possums, because the Ministry of Health, what is the link between the Ministry of Health and possum trapping? You may ask. The fact of the matter is that this guy who just wants to get in the bush and kill possums actually has to go in and identify where river courses are, where waterways. In fact, it's only river courses that lead to drinking reservoirs of towns. He has to identify where schools are. This guy goes way up in the bush, miles away from anywhere, and he has to fill out a plan that shows all these things that happen to be miles and miles away when he's using cyanide that breaks down in the water in next to no time and has absolutely no effect 3 kilometres downstream on any wildlife whatsoever. So hopefully, Mr. Speaker, this bill will speed things up, make things easier for this poor possum trapper who's just trying to earn a living but is inundated with bureaucracy. He's not a person who likes to get behind a computer and use a pen and do all that sort of stuff. He just wants to get out of the bush and kill possums. Now, Manuka honey was another issue that Sue Kedgley from the Greens brought up. Up north, the Manuka honey industry is a fledgling industry with a lot of potential for export. In fact, I was at the opening of the beekeeping school in Kaitaia not 12 months ago, and they showed us these products that Manuka honey can actually be used to make, because most people think honey just goes on your toast. There are in fact bandages that are infused with Manuka honey because of the antibacterial properties. The only machine, I'm told, in the world that can produce these antibacterial Manuka infused bandages is in London, in England. And the demand for this Manuka honey is 2,000 tonnes per annum just to make these bandages, and yet we can only fulfil 300 tonnes per annum. So there's a massive potential there for the economy, Mr. Speaker. So we have to make sure that we don't get things, little critters like these varroa mites that have got into New Zealand and now are affecting hives all around the country. We have to make sure that at our borders we don't have these biosecurity threats getting in, which is why we have to ask that we have 54 jobs, frontline jobs, culled from the biosecurity ministry. It's an absolute ridiculous. It's an absolute ridiculous situation that we are removing staff from a frontline industry that's going to protect our primary produce being exported overseas. And I would like to think that this bill, a part of this bill would be to replace those frontline staff or return those frontline staff so that we actually have those protections at our border. Mr. Speaker, I just want to touch quickly on the Y262 claim, because the government, the Crown, has an obligation to protect the flora and fauna, and our indigenous flora and fauna, and if we allow these pest invasions, these incursions into New Zealand to come and damage our native flora and fauna, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe the Crown is fulfilling its obligations under the Treaty of Waitangi. I don't believe the Crown is fulfilling the intent of the Y262 report that's come out recently. And I know the Crown is going to have a look at that and see what they can do in terms of the Y262, Mr. Speaker, but I believe it is incumbent on the government to actually produce legislation that is going to protect our borders and the whole biosecurity.